Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. A Thoughts to Inspire interview. At the Work Wellness Institute, the future of work starts with well-being. Dive into our Workplace Wellness Work Bites for summaries of our carefully curated trending webinars, published workplace research findings, and informative interviews with key industry subject matter experts. Learn and stay informed about work wellness anywhere, anytime with Workistic, your work wellness resource on the go. Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire series, bringing together subject matter experts from across sectors to present evidence-informed, thought-provoking ideas and approaches. These interviews invite conversation and bring attention to the most pivotal and timely workplace wellness topics.
Welcome to our Thoughts to Inspire interview series, where we interview experts in their fields, bringing together thought-provoking ideas and emerging approaches to the health and performance of the workplace. We are the Work Wellness Institute, and as an organization, we're committed to bringing research that address real challenges and opportunities individuals are facing in their workplaces today, across sectors, and into the hands of those that need it most and when they need it. There's been a real focus on the concept of burnout, usually positioned as a result of chronic workplace stress, often presenting as similar to symptoms as depression and posing significant disruption to performance and quality of individual contribution to the workplace, with a 40% increase globally just over the last quarter. Today, we continue to break down what some of that actually means and some of the terminology we're hearing more and more, specifically what that could mean from a leadership perspective of employee engagement and retention. I'm Camila Caroli, Vice President with the Work Wellness Institute, and really pleased to be speaking with Nina Hornjatkevyc as our guest in today's installment. Nina is the Counseling Director at Canada Career Counseling and Synthesis Psychology. Nina is a registered psychologist and a member of the College of Alberta Psychologists and the Psychologist Association of Alberta. She completed a Master's of Science degree in Counseling Psychology at the University of Calgary and a Bachelor of Education and Bachelor of Arts degree at the University of Alberta. As an experienced registered psychologist, career counselor, and career coach, she is passionate about helping people to develop their careers and well-being in their lives. Her areas of specialty include career planning and development, resilience, managing burnout, stress, transitions, and supporting work-life wellness. I'll hand it over to you, Nina, to talk a little bit more about yourself and the focus of your work before we dive into all my questions I have for you today.
Well, it's a pleasure and a privilege to be having this conversation with you, Camilla. And thank you for the introduction. I do have the great honor of getting to work with individuals and then also with organizations on this topic. And burnout is a significant factor, as you noted, that's impacting people globally and certainly within Canada as well. And so I know that a lot of our clients at Canada Career Counseling in particular are presenting with burnout symptoms, and the implications are interesting, both at the individual level and at the organizational level. So it'll be wonderful to have this conversation today with you.
Welcome. To start, the term burnout is everywhere. The World Health Organization has officially classified burnout as an occupational health phenomenon, yet still there's a sense of vagueness about what the term actually means. So maybe you can help us out today of what is burnout.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Camilla. There are a lot of people use burnout differently, and some people use it in a more, let's say, conversational way, but the most frequently used definition or I guess way of explaining burnout is the one exactly that's been put out by the World Health Organization in the International Classification of Diseases. So that burnout is a syndrome that results from chronic workplace stress and that hasn't been successfully managed. And there are different dimensions of burnout that they've identified, and there are three general dimensions that they've noted. And one has to do with the exhaustion that we hear about and that we see in people who are experiencing burnout. So that sense of being so tired and being depleted. And then the second dimension that they note is this increased mental distance from job or feeling negativity, cynicism related to a particular position, potentially even expanding to a particular field. And then the third is that reduced professional efficacy, and that can look a number of different ways, but a lot of it has to do with essentially people not feeling good at what they do. And so there's this associated lack of confidence that happens, and how people are perceived and how people perceive themselves. And so all of those factors come together to make up this occupational phenomenon. And it's both an individual and then also an organizational issue. So it's really about it's ultimately actually more so about the environment and what's happening within a workplace environment, more so than it is specifically even about a susceptible individual. And so that's one of the things that the World Health Organization classification is helping us to really dive into and to see.
And so in the workplace, what could that look like?
Yeah, it looks a number of different ways, and it really depends on the individual and some of what's happening that's leading to burnout. So people are presenting as overworked, they're overwhelmed, and when people are experiencing burnout, it's like this window of tolerance narrows. So situations that might not otherwise cause or lead to disengagement will start to elicit that kind of a reaction. And situations that might not bother somebody, might not make somebody particularly irritable, will start to make people express irritability. And when enough of that happens, and when there are a number of factors that are contributing to that happening, then it has this outcome that ends up manifesting as what we now see as burnout. And so it really ranges. Like people talk about, I don't know, maybe I'm not good at what I do. There's low energy, low motivation. There's that feeling of, I don't know, I used to love what I do. I don't love it anymore. That can also lead to a bit of resentment can even come up, where people wonder, why aren't my colleagues, why isn't my organization seeing what's happening to me, or noticing potentially or doing something about what's happening to others around me. And so that can add to how this appears and how this plays out. But I'll say it comes up time and again at Canada Career Counseling. I had a conversation just this morning with somebody who happened to call in and was seeking services, and this is exactly what they're going through. This is what they're experiencing. And it's really unfortunate, because they're capable people who are experiencing this sort of like low confidence, low energy, low drive, frustration. And there are strategies that can help, but this is the reality of what's happening to a lot of people.
So right out of, taking that into consideration right off the hop for our listeners, are there myths that are surrounding burnout that we might be able to address?
Yeah. So I would say some of the kinds of thoughts that some people have, or some myths that do tend to come up, have to do with emphasizing the role of the person in all of this. People sometimes see burnout as a personal failing, whether they're referring to themselves or to other people. And what's coming up increasingly in the research, and what we also see when dealing with individuals and also with organizations, is that focusing on the individual is essential. However, there are organizational factors that are contributing to what's happening to people. And so some of what's been seen as maybe someone's particular responsibility to deal with and to manage and take care of on their own doesn't adequately address the realities of what burnout actually encompasses and involves.
It was mentioned a little earlier that there has been this 40% global increase in burnout over the past quarter. And there has been a lot of discussion around burnout and mental health, a mental health pandemic. in the workplace have become much more common following the COVID-19 pandemic. Is there a correlation in your opinion? And if so, how have you seen the conversations around mental health in the workplace change over the last couple of years?
Yeah, the correlations are significant. There are a lot of pressures coming at people. So the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in careers where the actual occupational circumstances have changed significantly. So whether that be with teachers, healthcare providers, first responders, some of these types of professions where they've been so significantly impacted in the last few years. We've seen so many clients reaching out who are members of some of those sectors. It's interesting that additional factors, let's say economic factors, uncertainty globally in terms of safety, there's this drive to find some kind of sense of something people can like hang on to, like a sense of certainty. There's been so much change, so much transition, and as much as the world continues to evolve under any circumstances, but certainly recently especially, there's been quite a drive to figure out solutions to people experiencing burnout. And as an example, I know that there are members of a particular local school board who revealed to me that in the last several months, when it came time for teachers to apply for potentially a transfer, that hundreds of teachers applied for a transfer, and just within that one school division. And so people are looking for change. They're hoping to figure something out, and they're hoping that potentially by not leaving their field but changing their circumstances, that something could improve. But when that's one sector, and you multiply this across locations and across fields and work settings, there's no wonder that there's a disruption, and that this is a significant issue. And it's worth exploring. So it's brilliant that the Work Wellness Institute is doing this and looking at how to support people through this, and how to support organizations and leaders in their roles.
That's it. It is interesting, and then you mentioned specific sectors, a lot of public-facing sectors, and so from your work experience, obviously you're getting those types of professions reaching out to you. From that experience, are there other elements or employee populations that are more susceptible to burnout?
I'd say it a major factor. So one of the, because there's been so much disruption, a number of organizations have of course been doing a dive into trying to figure out what's going on. And so I would say sectors, across sectors, really, like toxic workplace behaviors comes to mind as a significant factor that's come up in some research. So the McKinsey Health Institute, they did a study in 2022, and so they did a research project that included 15,000 people across 15 countries, and the number one predictor of burnout was toxic workplace behavior. So this fact indicates that, because toxic workplace behavior can happen anywhere, potentially, or has the potential to. And so it's that kind of, I guess, a contributor to all of this means that whether it's, let's say, a teacher, whether it's someone in potentially a large organization, a small organization, that anyone can be susceptible to some of the contributors to burnout.
So following up a little bit on that susceptibility, I know in your practice you look at a lot of the intersections, and a lot of the literature out there really looks or mentions that it's women in younger generations that are really prominently experiencing burnout. So from your work experience, would you say that's true?
We do see a lot of women, people who identify as female, and then also people who are in younger age ranges coming forward seeking support. there's a lot. You're so right that there's a lot at the intersections between our professional lives and our personal lives, and so there can just be so many different factors that people are navigating, and juggling, and the whether it be, let's say, trying to also manage, um, being someone who's like in the sandwich generation, where they're looking after their children, they're looking after trying to support aging parents, and navigating multiple workplace demands. And so it makes sense. It makes sense that when when challenging circumstances arise in the workplace, that narrowing of resources and the narrowing of capacity happens. Um, yeah, and there are some strategies, of course, that can help. There are also some significant realities that um, that I think are also worth acknowledging. I think everyone's on board with trying to figure this out. Nobody wants anybody to be dealing with burnout. Um, the realities of how are we going to do this? How are we going to pay for this? Are people going to be on board to actually make significant, let's say, personal or organizational changes? Those are the hard questions. Those are the real questions where individual and organizational solutions are being explored right now. So I, I yeah, I think it's worth recognizing that there isn't a one size fits all, but there are some general recommendations and approaches and strategies that can help overall, and that can be a wonderful, brilliant starting point, where everybody ultimately gets to benefit.
Thanks. I know there was, you touched on this a bit earlier, but there was a Gallup 2020 analysis. Already in our world, 3 years is a long time, but analysis on employee burnout that suggests that how employees experience their workload has a stronger influence on burnout than the number of hours they're actually working. And so from that leadership perspective and some of those solutions, once that burnout has been identified, um, what can be done in the short term, and are there longer term strategies?
Absolutely, absolutely brilliant, and important. So some of the shorter term strategies, I sometimes think of them as how to avoid death by 1,000 paper cuts. There's some sort of easier to implement strategies of having certain conversations. And like you say, if burnout's already been identified, then figuring out what is it, what are the specific circumstances. So there are there are some wonderful leaders out there who are asking questions like, so how are things going? How am I doing? But getting even more specific, asking about specific, let's say, additional information. I can't count how many times I get the sort of like two different people coming forward saying, I'm being micromanaged and it's driving me bonkers. And then on the other side of the coin, nobody's telling me what they want from me. They say, just figure it out. And I feel unsupported. And sometimes the maybe individual factors that might be contributing here have to do with differences between, let's say, anything like personality to resources and that sort of thing. But some strategies can be implemented to ask, okay, so if somebody feels micromanaged, what can help them to know that what can help a leader to know that they can count on this person to get certain things done and to be trusted to do that. On the flip side, if somebody feels like they've just been handed this thing and they don't even know where to begin, a leader can ask specific questions of, okay, so what specifically, when I gave you this feedback or when I gave you that task, what additional information do you need from me? Like some of these kinds of things that people know to do, but just doing them consistently, and it's going to depend on the person. And asking some of those questions helps with identifying that. I would say acknowledging people is another huge one that I hear about, which is people really are trying to do good work. People typically actually want to do a good job. And when they put in a lot of effort and they feel like it hasn't been recognized, not everybody wants a ticker tape parade, but, or a lot of, like, I don't know, the lens even significantly turn toward them, but every once in a while helping to acknowledge the effort put in and the specific contributors to that. People notice that, and they don't know how to bring it up in terms of how do I let my leader know that this actually is the way that I would like to feel acknowledged. They're not even necessarily looking for, I don't know, a bonus in some situations. Some people are, but being able to be acknowledged for the work that they're doing, the effort that they're putting in, it helps to motivate additional action, and reduces that sense of, I feel like I'm on a treadmill and the only reward I get for good work is more work. So that understandably can lead to some exhaustion and some cynicism. The another one, this one's a really easy one, but it touches on a couple of different points. This has to do with responding to emails at 11 p.m. This sort of thing. Like if somebody's working outside of regular business hours, that's a bigger question, but and needs to be addressed. It's one thing that happens occasionally, but if there's almost like this kind of like badge of honor of, oh, I got through all my messages by 11 p.m. So, and then that's when everybody can see when these messages have arrived. People are getting pinged. It sets, especially if a leader's doing this, and they're probably just trying to plow through a million different tasks. But it sets a particular tone. It sets a particular precedent for then, okay, so that's what the leader's doing. So therefore, that's what's expected of me. And if people can just set like delay delivery on some of these things, it's remarkable that some minor tweaks like this can have a significant impact. I know that that's not going to, solve the global burnout challenge in and of itself, but there are some of these kinds of quick strategies that can have a significant impact.
Yes, that last one resonates. I know, just going from thinking about work 24/7 to having that very intentional disconnect from work. There's deadlines and you have to do it, but I know I have very much myself started to use that, and as a team we've come up with different ways. So absolutely, those resonate a lot, and I hope they do for our audience as well. So on top of that, mental health has had stigma. Let's talk, Bells, let's talk to break those stigmas. So it's been around for a long time. And how does this translate into the impact that there has around burnout and the decision to disclose or seek support specifically for burnout?
Yeah, this one's big because people typically want to come across as capable and like they can handle things. And as an example, I've had conversations with people who are first responders who basically they're foundationally they're in a role where it's about handling challenging circumstances. And so there's some people who have, let's say, a wellness package in place and they're using it for other things, but they're paying out of pocket for appointments with me because they don't want anyone to find out that they're accessing services. And so that's significant. And a lot of people won't do something like that. They don't reach out, and there are fields, organizations, companies that lose really great people because they didn't reach out, because they don't want to let anybody know that things have gotten to a place where they're unsustainable. And so instead, some of them do things like change fields. And then people think, oh, well, you know what? They just were looking for a change or something like that. And sometimes that's absolutely the fit for that person. There's also the possibility that had certain interventions, strategies, approaches been implemented, let's say at a workplace level, that might not have been necessary. So certainly the stigma piece is a big hurdle, and so this is another wonderful, fact about the fact that this conversation is happening, that people are researching what's going on. People are really looking into the implications of what's happening, because hopefully then it'll help to reduce stigma. And senior leaders absolutely, there are opportunities to open up conversations in ways that don't lead them to be in a role where they're like trying to therapize people or needing to be someone's therapist, which is not the fit. That's not going to work out. It's not appropriate. And yet demonstrating care in a way that could be appropriate. So opening up conversations, let's say within, even when onboarding people, about the importance of communicating around workflows, or ensuring that there's enough information for people to know what's expected of them, and they're invited to raise, let's say, certain red flags around, let's say, workload or workflow, or certain communications happening that's certainly far from ideal. Setting up, let's say, performance metrics that have to do with people treating each other well, and what that means to different people. Of course, that varies in different contexts, different settings. It's going to depend. So it needs to be tailored, but some of these kinds of initiatives help people to know that they can raise a hand before something turns out to get to this burnout level where there's the exhaustion and they're questioning their abilities and they're frustrated with the workplace. So some of these kinds of approaches help to reduce that stigma without having to even say, I don't know, we're doing this as a stigma reduction strategy. It kind of helps to take care of the issue, so it's less of an issue overall. And certainly around inclusion, that's another opportunity. When it comes to stigma, there are people who are where there are additional layers that can complicate whether they feel safe enough to be able to bring a particular need or a particular benefit that would help them do their work. And so if there are certain inclusion practices that are happening that are built in, then that helps people to know that they can bring something up. I don't know if this is relevant, but I think it's an interesting one. There are, as an example, because I do deal with people who are considering changing fields as well. And so there are some people who will have conversations with me where they're specifically targeting certain organizations and certain industries because of those organizations and industries' involvement in pride events. And so there are these kinds of trickle effects and ripple effects that organizations might not even be aware of that will actually impact the type of field that people are considering for themselves. And so that's just an example of how significant basically organizations' involvement in certain initiatives and some of what's put in place can have on individuals, and then also on being able to attract talent.
Everything always seems to come down to communication, right?
Yeah.
Always. Just pulling out one of those, especially around a little bit earlier, you talked about clarifying workloads and expectations. And again, that research around perception is a big cause of burnout. And so that communication to work with people can often use that burnout to really map things out and work with them to clarify roles, and then everything else that's just that common thread of open communication. So thanks for that. It seems age old, but nobody's mastered it yet, right?
Yeah, it's so dynamic. And it's also, I think it really highlights the role that opportunities that leaders have, and then also that employee service and employee experience areas have, where this is what human resources, employee experience professionals have been talking about. It's like you say, it's the age-old topics and strategies, and that we know have an impact. It's just now that it's impossible to ignore. the business impact is there. There's so much turnover, and the financial implications of needing to onboard new people, recruiting, and who's available and for what, and the ripple effect of when there's been attrition and bringing on new people and onboarding. Yeah, it's we can't ignore it. We just can't.
Most people aren't very good at it. It's also a skill set, right? So, building on that, this is a lot in the hands of leaders. Leadership is brought often as carrying this. This is not just the individual. If we're going to break that stigma, and so if we look at the leader though as an employee who's maybe been put into that role because they are good at what they do, communication skills are a huge gap across all industries, all sectors. And so there's, now they need to meet the bottom line, or they need to get the work done. But now there's also this added awareness of mental health, awareness to address burnout while they themselves, are facing burnout. So that Forbes article I referenced before, but the year started out something like 70% of executives, it was US based, but considered quitting. And that 43% of middle managers, reported burnout. And so are there separate considerations for leadership in addressing burnout, both for themselves and their employees?
Yeah, this is so important, especially because people don't typically go into a leadership role because they don't want it to go well. They're skilled people, they're capable people, they're driven, they want to move things forward, and then they can end up feeling like they've been tasked with something like that just isn't budging, and that's frustrating, especially when people are driven to actually move things forward. So, and there's a lot on their plates, and so this is some of the structural factors that can help to take kind of to kind of share I was going to share the responsibility, but it is sort of that to make sure that they're set up for success, that there are, let's say, certain strategies they can use for some of the communication. People might have 10 minutes with their direct report in a week, with each of let's say some of the people who they need to be in touch with. That's not a lot of time. So acknowledging that if there can be certain decisions made around what will help with motivating, what will help with moving things forward, having some of those collaborative conversations with multiple stakeholders, with having some of these more organization-wide initiatives identified, and then they can be, let's say, set as strategic priorities. Okay, we're going to focus on this one. Knowing that they're also human, that's big. I think sometimes people lose sight of that and target a lot of things at leaders, and that they might need to take responsibility for some of those things. Other things might not be within their scope to be able to fully control. And so I do think some humanizing of leaders goes a long way, and having that combination of also ensuring that they've got support in place for themselves at the individual level, and then also at that organizational level. Those pieces all come together to help. And there are specific strategies that they can use also where, when having certain conversations, let's say, with people, knowing that conversation is actually welcome, the information is appreciated, and that something's going to be done with that information, whether it be they're having that conversation or they're on the receiving end of hearing about some of this information from someone who's going through burnout.
So after all that discussion, and we do get the right supports in place and have the right conversations, can burnout be prevented? And what are, if any, the preventative measures that could be implemented?
Mm. Burnout can be prevented. I don't know if it will be fully eliminated, but certainly there are changes that can be made. And all of us do have a role to play. So everything from onboarding, even hiring, figuring out, like making sure that um, role expectations are laid out so people know what they're getting into and what's going to be expected of them. A lot of that kind of clarity helps. It's not that everybody wants a free ride. I think sometimes there's a bit of that misconception that, oh, you know what, people just want it really easy. But there's some people who actually are a lot of people who are really eager to work really hard, as long as they know what's expected of them, and a number of criteria are met for them in terms of, let's say, even what's important for them. So looking for that alignment is huge. So right from the beginning, that can help all along the way. Also implementing some of those kinds of, let's say, conversations, and communicating that the flow of communication, whether it needs to be, let's say, putting in structures for the feedback to be given anonymously, and ideally also directly, to leaders, all of that helps as well. Inclusion practices, recognizing that if someone's identified as exhibiting, let's say, some of these toxic workplace behaviors, that has to be addressed. And of course, the specific strategies for doing that are going to vary, but that helps as well. But especially given that was identified as such a core piece of all of this. If people feel, let's say, undermined, this cutthroat competition, if it's not about like cutting out all competition, some people it fires them up, but the kind that like leaves a wake of bodies, it'll have an impact after a while. Getting to work on addressing some of those factors. That's where the biggest gains are likely to be seen.
Would you say, just pulling on that it does seem that we're learning a lot about this? It's almost a bit of a chicken and egg that a toxic workplace could come from people experiencing burnout and have that kind of domino effect from managers to team members and back, and trying to figure that out, what the root cause of that toxicity is, but that at least it's addressed within a very addressed very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Such an interesting question, and like any chicken and egg phenomenon, there's definitely some information gathering that's needed, because you're so right, that trying to figure out what the root causes are, it's layered. There are some initiatives that are being done to try to do surveys to specifically dive into some of the factors that have been identified as contributors to burnout. And one of the, I guess, pieces to integrate in is recognizing that if people ask those questions, which it sounds like we've got to start asking if they're not already being asked, because of how pervasive this is, that when people ask the questions, then also people will expect action. And so it is an undertaking. And so that does involve including, let's say, senior leaders in identifying how will that be done and what are the implications. But I do think there's a strong business case for it, because of the implications of all of this.
Yeah. So we're nearing the end of our interview, but also 2023. And so looking into those coming years, from an individual perspective and as a practitioner, what is it that employees are looking for from employers from a burnout mental health support perspective? You talked a lot about ideally, the structures that should be in place. Does that match what people are looking for specifically?
I would say people are looking to be heard. And again, it doesn't have to be like in a therapy context, but that's significant. I'm glad that people are coming forward and talking to somebody like me and my colleagues. Um, and it's also important to have those conversations internally. I know that I coach people often to highlight the overarching goal that they have is to support the success of the organization, to support their role within it, and that these particular factors are undermining that. So if there can be shared goals identified, that has a lot of potential. Um, I know that's not always possible. Some people are not looking to continue on. They're so done with a particular setting organization, but then that's an additional, I guess, conversation or series of conversations that then would need to be had. So being able to communicate again about some of those factors, that's key, and seeing some action taken, and then also providing some feedback when some of these initiatives are done. What are some of the intentions, and then also how's the impact going to be measured, and reporting back to employees and to everyone across organizations about the effects of and the outcomes of some initiatives, so that people know that okay, a particular initiative, they might even be skeptical about whether it's going to have enough of an impact. But when people can get feedback that there's actually some constructive impact happening, then they start to have a bit more faith in, okay, so if we do this additional initiative, okay, maybe that also will incrementally work on something that's a fairly big issue with a lot of factors connected to it. So using some of those information gathering, implementing, and then information sharing strategies does help a lot. Yeah, and continuing to provide individual support is of course important. As much as of course the coping strategies, wellness initiatives are primarily about helping to address some of the symptoms and the outcomes of some of what's caused all of this, it does go a long way to helping people know that their the individual impact on them is also being taken into consideration. It's just useful to loop people in on what kinds of supports they would actually appreciate having. So whether it be, let's say, access to certain types of extended health benefits, whether it be access to development opportunities, whether it be potentially even job sharing or working in let's say a hybrid work setting or fully remotely or fully in office, whatever it is. It's going to depend on the person, depend on the field. But integrating people, asking them about what they know will support them, that has a lot of potential also for impact.
To build on that, is there something in your experience that you found that might surprise employers who are listening today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and an interesting one has to do with certain types of opportunities, and even certain types of, I guess, redeployment or upskilling or reskilling. That there are a lot of people who are actually looking for lateral career opportunities, both from the opportunity of basically being able to learn about a particular area or to change things up a bit, maybe hoping for, I guess, either deepening skills or broadening skills. So something that actually has been supported in some of the research, which I can provide some links to in resources as well, is that based on an extensive study of employee data, it was found that offering lateral career opportunities has 2.5 times more predictive power of employee retention than compensation even, and 12 times more predictive than promotions. So I don't know that that's necessarily always, I guess, capitalized on or even known.
That's great. Thank you. So as we come to the end of our time, I guess maybe you could end up with what are your hopes? What's your blue sky for the future of workplace in terms of addressing burnout and mental health? Yes.
Mm-hmm. I do think the insight that the impact of toxic workplace behavior, and so much potential there to help to address some of those effects. I think that gives a very tangible, or maybe not tangible, more like a concrete focus to be able to basically chip away at some of what's been going on. I think that's an important insight, an important opportunity. I think the fact that people are recognizing the implications of this at the individual and also organizational level, everybody has the potential to benefit from that. So I think it's brilliant that people are looking at this and that solutions and actions are being taken. So I think that those are some of the takeaways that stand out for me of all of this, is that every incremental change will be just that, and it'll move us in a direction where we all get to benefit. So that seems pretty hopeful to me.
Thank you, Nina. It's been great to sit down and being able to talk about this with you and capture your insight and contribution to this topic for our audience. Are there any specific key takeaways you're hoping our audience will walk away with today?
I think that there's so much potential for impact, really, and given that burnout is a workplace phenomenon, that ensuring that there are organizational level strategies in addition to individual strategies in place will be key to helping to move this forward. Also, the insight that's come out increasingly that toxic workplace behavior is the biggest predictor of burnout, and that therefore it provides potential for really, I guess, targeting interventions individually, but then also organizationally to have impact on that factor. And then there's also the opportunities through the communication we've been talking about, where if it's possible to gather information specifically about what has been impacting particular individuals or let's say even entire work units, asking specific questions and then brokering resources that are really targeted to help to navigate some of that depletion, exhaustion, the distance, negativity, cynicism that can come up, and then also the reduced professional efficacy that people can end up feeling. So all of those provide so much potential for impact.
Great. Thanks again, Nina. It's been a real pleasure and very informative, insightful. So thank you, and thanks for the work you do and for sharing with our audience today. For our audience, the recording of today's conversation will be on our website. For more tools and resources in general, the workplace health and performance, please visit the Work Wellness Institute at workwellnessinstitute.org. Thank you to the Work Wellness Institute team and Merit Media Group for making this possible. Again, I'm Camila Caroli, and it was an absolute honor to represent our organization in today's discussion.
Continue your learning and connect with us at www.workwellnessinstitute.org.